You did everything right. You maxed your 401k. You skipped the fancy vacations. You drove the boring car. You sat across from a financial advisor who showed you a spreadsheet with a nice clean number on it. And you said, okay, that's the target. And you spent the next 20 years chasing it. And now you're getting close. Or maybe you're already there. And something feels off. Because when you actually run the math, like sit down and do the real math, it doesn't quite work the way they told you it would. Here's the thing nobody in the financial industry wants to say out loud. The retirement number you've been chasing was built on assumptions that were already getting shaky when your kids were in diapers. The formula isn't just outdated. In some cases, it was never calibrated for your actual life in the first place. And that's not your fault. But it is your problem. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to walk you through 5 cracks in the foundation of standard retirement planning. 5 places where the math breaks down before most people even realize it. By the end of this, you'll know exactly why the projection lies, what the real numbers look like, and what to actually do about it. Let's get into it. All right, let's start with the rule itself. The 4% rule. You've heard it. Your advisor has probably said it. It's everywhere. The idea is simple. If you have $1 million saved, you can withdraw 4%, so $40,000 every year, and statistically, you won't run out of money before you die. Clean, simple, reassuring. Here's the problem. That rule came from a single research paper written in 1994 by a financial planner named Bill Bengen. And when you look at what that paper actually assumed, the cracks start showing immediately. Bengen's model was built around a 30-year retirement window. You retire at 65, you die at 95, the math holds. That's the box the rule lives in. But here's where it gets interesting. A healthy 60-year-old today has a genuinely real shot at living into their 90s, maybe beyond, which means if you retire at 62, you're not looking at a 30-year window anymore. You might be looking at 35 years, 40 years. The rule wasn't built for that. And when you run the numbers on a 40-year withdrawal period instead of 30, the 4% rate starts to crack. But wait, it gets better. Bengen's original model also leaned heavily on bond yields from the 80s and early 90s. And if you remember that era, or if your parents do, bonds actually paid something back then. We're talking yields that made bonds a real engine in a retirement portfolio. That environment is gone. It's been gone for a long time, which means the balanced portfolio the rule assumed looks completely different from what most people are actually holding today. So let's run the actual math. $1 million at 4% gives you $40,000 a year. Okay, sounds like something. But now let's be real about what that $40,000 actually is. If most of that money is sitting in a traditional 401k, which it probably is, those withdrawals get taxed as ordinary income. So you're not taking home $40,000. Depending on your tax bracket and state, you might be taking home $32,000, maybe $34,000. And then inflation gets a turn. At 3% annual inflation, your purchasing power drops by roughly half over 24 years. So that $32,000 you're taking home in year 1, by year 24, it buys what $16,000 buys today. I don't know about you, but I can't retire on $16,000 a year. My coffee habit alone would stage a revolt. And here's the part that really keeps people up at night. Most people in their 50s right now are planning around the 4% rule because that's what they were told to plan around. Their advisor used it. The online calculators use it. It's baked into every retirement projection tool you've ever touched, but nobody flagged that the rule was already under pressure when it was written, has been poked full of holes by researchers in the years since, and was never designed to handle the combination of longer lifespans, lower bond yields, and a tax environment that didn't exist in 1994. Some researchers now say 3%, or 3.3%, is a more honest, safe withdrawal rate for retirements that might stretch 35 to 40 years. And here's what that means practically. At 3% instead of 4%, that same $1 million gives you $30,000 a year before taxes. Not 40,000, 30,000. To get back to that $40,000 a year at 3%, you need 1.3 million, not 1 million. The finish line just moved, and most people are still running toward the old one. So the rule is cracked. But here's where it gets worse, because the number you're trying to hit might be wrong too. Okay, so you've got a number. Maybe your advisor gave it to you. Maybe you ran it through one of those online calculators that asks for your age and your current savings and then spits out a big scary figure. Maybe you just picked $1 million because it sounds like the right answer and you've been quietly hoping that's enough. The problem isn't the number. The problem is that you're treating it like a finish line when it's actually more like a weather forecast. Let me show you why. There's a concept called sequence of returns risk, and it is one of the most underexplained ideas in all of retirement planning. Here's how it works. Take two people, same age, both retire with $1 million, both average 7% returns over a 20-year retirement. On paper, identical, but person one hits a bad market in year one, down 30%. Their portfolio drops to $700,000 before they even finish unpacking their retirement party balloons. Now every withdrawal they take comes out of a smaller base. The compounding math works against them from day one. Person two hits that same bad market in year 10. By then, they've had 9 good years of growth behind them. The portfolio absorbs the hit and keeps going. Same average return. Same starting balance. Completely different outcomes. Person one can run out of money a decade before person two. That's sequence of returns risk. And it has nothing to do with how much you saved. It has everything to do with when the market decides to have a bad day relative to when you retire. And here's the thing. You don't get to pick your retirement date on the stock market's calendar. You retire when you retire, which means this risk isn't theoretical. It's a coin flip built into the foundation of every retirement plan. Now let's talk about the slow leak. Inflation. 3% annual inflation sounds like a rounding error. It doesn't feel dangerous, but here's what it actually does over time. At 3% inflation, your purchasing power gets cut in half in roughly 24 years. So if you retire at 62 with a budget of $50,000 a year, by the time you're 86, that $50,000 buys what $25,000 buys today, which means your number, whatever number you're targeting right now, needs to be big enough to fund not just your current cost of living, but your future cost of living too. And those are two very different figures. But here's the part that really scrambles the math. Retirement spending isn't flat. Most people assume they'll spend roughly the same amount every year in retirement. Budget it out, stick to it, done. That's not what actually happens. Researchers have found that retirement spending follows what's called a spending smile. Early retirement, you're active. You're traveling. You're doing the things you put off for 30 years. Spending is high. Then it dips in the middle years as you slow down. And then it spikes again at the end, not because you're having fun, but because healthcare gets expensive, really expensive. So your retirement budget isn't one number across 30 years. It's 3 different numbers. High, then low, then high again. And that last spike, the healthcare one, is the one that shows up uninvited and without warning. What this means for you is pretty simple, even if it's uncomfortable. Your retirement number isn't a single figure on a spreadsheet. It's a range, and that range is almost certainly bigger than whatever you wrote down. Okay, so the rule is broken, and the number is a moving target. But what about the timeline? Spoiler alert, that's broken too. Here's the dirty secret that retirement planning content almost never talks about. Most people don't choose. When they retire, they get pushed out. I know that sounds harsh, but the data backs it up. Studies consistently show that a significant chunk of people, we're talking somewhere around half, end up retiring earlier than they planned. Not because they hit their number, not because they decided to finally book that trip to Italy, but because something happened. A health issue, a layoff, a parent who needed care, a company that decided their 60-year-old salary was better replaced by a 28-year-old with lower expectations. The retirement timeline you're planning around assumes you stay employed, stay healthy, and stay in control right up until the date you circled on the calendar. And for a lot of people, that's just not how it goes. So let's run the numbers on what early retirement actually costs, because this is where the math gets quietly brutal. Say you plan to retire at 65, but at 62, your company does a restructuring and you're out, or your knees give out, or your spouse gets sick and someone needs to be home. Whatever the reason, You stop working 3 years early. Here's what those 3 years actually cost you. You lose 3 years of contributions. If you were putting in $20,000 a year, that's $60,000 that never goes in. You lose 3 years of compounding on your existing balance. On a $500,000 portfolio at 7% growth, that's roughly $100,000 in growth you never see. And then, this is the one that really stings, you flip from the accumulation phase to the withdrawal phase 3 years early. So instead of adding to the pile, you're now taking from it, earlier than the math ever planned for. That's not a minor adjustment. That's a completely different retirement than the one you modeled. And then there's the healthcare gap. If you stop working before 65, you are not on Medicare yet. Medicare starts at 65. Full stop. Which means from 62 to 65, you're paying for private health insurance. Out of pocket. And if you've priced that recently, you know it's not cute. We're talking potentially $15,000 to $20,000 a year for a couple, depending on your health and your state. That cost alone can demolish a retirement budget that wasn't built to absorb it. Now let's talk about Social Security, because this is where the timeline trap really closes in. You can start taking Social Security at 62. And when you're sitting at home at 63 with no paycheck coming in, that early benefit check looks extremely attractive. I get it, but here's what it costs you. If your full retirement age is 67 and you take benefits at 62 instead, your monthly check gets permanently reduced by roughly 30%. And if you waited until 70 instead, the maximum delay, your benefit would be about 76% higher than the 62 amount. 76% higher every month for the rest of your life. Run that out over a 25-year retirement, and we're talking a difference that can easily reach $200,000, $250,000 in lifetime benefits, just from the timing of when you claim. But most people take it early because they feel like they have no other choice, because the timeline didn't go the way the spreadsheet said it would. What this means for you is this: build a plan that does not assume you control your retirement date, because the odds say you might not, and if you're not ready for that, the math unravels fast. So the rule is flawed, the number moves, and the timeline isn't yours to control. Now let's talk about the thing that quietly eats everything. All right, so we've established that the 4% rule is shaky, your target number moves, and the timeline is basically a suggestion. Now let's talk about the part that takes everything we've already discussed and makes it worse. Most retirement projections show you a gross number. A big, clean, reassuring figure at the top of a spreadsheet. What they don't show you, what almost nobody shows you, is what you actually keep after taxes, fees, and the costs that never make it into the model. Let's start with taxes, because this one hits harder than most people expect. If your retirement savings are sitting in a traditional 401k or a traditional IRA, which is true for the vast majority of people, every dollar you pull out gets taxed as ordinary income, not capital gains rates, ordinary income, the same rate as a paycheck. So say you need $60,000 a year to live on in retirement. To actually take home $60,000, you need to withdraw more than that. Depending on your bracket and your state, you might need to pull $70,000 or $75,000 just to net the $60,000 you need. That gap, that $15,000 gap, is money your projection probably didn't account for, and it compounds every single year. But here's where the tax story gets a second act. At age 73, the IRS stops being patient. That's when required minimum distributions kick in. The government mandates that you start pulling money out of your pre-tax accounts whether you need it or not. And if your balance has grown nicely, which is the goal, right? Those forced withdrawals can be large enough to shove you into a higher tax bracket, which means you pay more tax on your Social Security, which triggers higher Medicare premiums. It's a lovely little chain reaction that nobody mentioned when you were dutifully maxing out your 401k 30 years ago. Now, let's talk about fees. And I want you to actually feel this number, not just hear it. Say you've got $500,000 in retirement accounts, and you're paying 1% annually in fees. That sounds like nothing. 1%. Basically a rounding error. Over 20 years, at 7% average growth, that 1% fee costs you roughly $180,000 in lost compounding. $180,000. Gone. Not to a bad market, not to a recession, to a fee that felt too small to worry about. And the brutal irony is that most people have no idea what they're paying. The fees are buried in expense ratios and advisory agreements, written in a font size designed to discourage reading. Get your expense ratio below 0.2%, and you've already done something most retirees never bother to do. Then there's Medicare. Specifically, the surcharge most people don't know exists until they get the bill. If your combined income in retirement, including Social Security, withdrawals, investment income, crosses certain thresholds, your Medicare Part B and Part D premiums go up significantly. This is called IRMAA, and it's the kind of acronym that should come with a warning label. For a couple, crossing one of those income thresholds can add several $1,000s a year in Medicare costs. Just like that. No. Warning. No opt-out. And finally, the wild card that almost every retirement plan completely ignores: long-term care. The median annual cost of a private nursing home room in the United States is somewhere north of $100,000 a year, and the median stay is around 2.5 years. Do that math. That's $250,000 that shows up at the end of your life, usually when you have the least capacity to deal with it, and most retirement plans have exactly $0 allocated for it. What this means for you is simple, even if it stings. Take whatever retirement number you're currently working toward and add 20 to 30%, because that's the gap between the gross figure your projection shows you and what you actually need to cover the real world. All right, we've torn the whole thing apart. Now, let's actually put something useful back together. So, we've ripped apart the 4% rule, shown you how the number moves, how the timeline can get yanked out from under you, and how taxes and fees quietly eat what's left. Now let's talk about what actually works. First thing to understand, the goal isn't to hit a number. It's to build a system that survives real conditions, not spreadsheet conditions. Real ones. Start with a floor. Build guaranteed income first. Social Security, a pension if you're lucky enough to have one, maybe a simple annuity. Something that covers your basic costs no matter what the market does. Then invest the rest for growth. Floor first, upside second. If you're between 50 and 65 and your income is lower than it'll be once Social Security and RMDs kick in, that window is gold for Roth conversions. You're paying tax now at a lower rate, so you don't pay it later at a higher one. Most people skip this entirely. Don't be most people. And keep 1 to 2 years of living expenses in cash or short-term bonds. Not because cash is a great investment, because it means you're never forced to sell stocks at the worst possible time just to pay your electric bill. The honest withdrawal rate for a retirement that might run 40 years? 3%, maybe 3.3. Run your number at that rate and see where you actually stand. Here's what all 5 of these pieces add up to. The retirement lie isn't one lie. It's 5 assumptions stacked on each other, and every crack multiplies the ones before it. Longer life breaks the 4% rule. That